What's going on, guys? Phantasm Mask here, and welcome to my first actual game review. By the time you're seeing this, I've got all of Resident Evil 6 main campaigns fully uploaded, and that's what I'm here to talk about. I haven't really done a game review in a very long time. I used to do them on one of my older channels, but I opened this one up for the sole purpose of doing Let's Plays and game reviews. And with Resident Evil 6, this was one of the titles in the year that I was highly anticipating, but at the same time also dreading, because Resident Evil 5 didn't resonate too well with me. It left a very bad taste in my mouth, and I'm not exactly sure how to feel about all of this stuff that Capcom was talking about before the release of Resident Evil 6. But now the game is dropped, and I've been able to play through the whole thing, save for the secret campaign, which at this point I don't really think that's going to add too much to the game. But playing the three main campaigns, I feel I can give an overall review for this game. And I want to break this review down into sections talking about the plot, story, gameplay, length, and even going into some of the special features and maybe even future DLC for this game. So right off the bat, going into the story, I know that there are some gamers out there who really aren't too concerned about Resident Evil's plots, especially after RE5, but as someone who has enjoyed Resident Evil games for the past, how long have I been playing them now? Maybe about 11, 12 years, I've grown to really like the game's plot and the whole conspiracies within corporations and things like that. I thought that, yeah, they were a bit cheesy, but at the same time they were entertaining. 5 kind of dipped off a little bit. I wouldn't say that the 5 story was that bad, it's just some characters were acting out of character for their established character, if you know what I mean. RE6... story-wise, is completely unnecessary. Going through Leon's campaign, and I think Leon's campaign is probably the worst offender here. When the villain in Leon's campaign explains his motivation, longtime players of the franchise will quickly realize that his motivation means nothing and ultimately becomes just another disposable villain. His motivation for wanting to reveal to the world what happened in Raccoon City, I believe at the very beginning of Resident Evil 4, during Leon's narration, it explains that the whole world already knows what happened with Umbrella and Raccoon City. There was nothing to hide anymore, and that the United States government was under scrutiny for what they allowed to happen in Raccoon City, and even the nuking of Raccoon City. So the villain's point of wanting to expose some kind of government conspiracy to cover up Raccoon City is completely moot. Overall, with the plot, I don't feel like that this is a Resident Evil game. I feel like Capcom are trying so hard to make an action movie that just so happens to have some zombies in it. I can't really say that this is a return to any form of survival horror, and I think that in the modern gaming age, with the current generation consoles, it's not possible for Capcom to attempt to make a survival horror game like the past Resident Evils, unless they were to go back to the original formula of fixed camera angles, those tight corridors and things like that. Overall, I felt like I was playing a giant action movie, and that was one of Resident Evil 5's faults, was that there was way too much action and not enough horror. One could argue that the very beginning of Leon's campaign in Chapter 1, not even the full chapter, could be considered survival horror. And I'm willing to give them that, but as soon as Chapter 1's over with, you go right into the standardized action sequences that it reminds me so much of a Tomb Raider game. I was questioning, you know, why are we here? What is the purpose of this going on? But then again, I'm trying to argue plot points with Capcom, who really haven't been on the best of terms in terms of making a story or even making a best-selling video game for that matter. So the plot really didn't strike me. The only thing I can really give you in terms of a spoiler is that there's a new corporation called Neo Umbrella, which is made up of members that you've never even heard of, put it to you that way, save for one member who really isn't a member, but you'll just have to play the game to find out. In terms of the gameplay mechanics, I feel like this is a step backwards from what we saw in Resident Evil 4 and 5. Shooting in this game feels very reminiscent of Operation Raccoon City, and having played that game earlier in this year and being very disappointed, I feel like, and this is something that Resident Evil 5 got right, in terms of the shooting mechanics and going over the shoulder. To me, it had the perfect angle, had the perfect amount of action and sensitivity. With Resident Evil 6, I can move and shoot, I can dive, I can slide, I can do all of these things. But if I can't focus on at least 6 or 7 different enemies at once, like I did in the past 2 Resident Evil games, I find that to be a bit of a problem. Granted, I have gotten used to it thanks to the Mercenaries mode, which I'll talk a little bit about later. I still feel like it's a step backwards, and not only is it a step back, but it's a step in the wrong direction. And at this point, I don't really see how Capcom could innovate in this area. I think what they had in Resident Evil 5 was fine. Even Resident Evil 4, for that matter, was fine. Probably the only advantage to the new gameplay mechanics that I could think of is the ability to melee at will. I don't really care so much about moving and shooting. That's not that big of a deal for me. I'm used to having to stand still and shoot at an object in a game. And again, this is not the first Resident Evil game to do this, but again, I'm used to the classic thing, and I'm not trying to say that the classic way is better. I'm just saying that I don't need to be able to move and shoot, and if I could have the old system back in RE6, I would much rather have that. Also, the abundance of quick-time events in this game. Quick-time events in almost every single game I've played that has a quick-time event is bad. And there are exceptions to this, like if you get grabbed by an enemy and you need to shake the stick or whatever. I understand that. But having to do certain quick-time events to progress through the game and the story, just let me play the game. Let me actually play. Quick-time events have never been something that was A, necessary, or B, wanted in this franchise. That's the #1 complaint I always hear about the Resident Evil games, is the quick-time events and how they shouldn't be there. I shouldn't have to shake the sticks or button mash just to crawl up a rope or across a pipe, is what I'm getting at. If I jump up on a pipe, I should be able to just move the control stick forward, crawl across a pipe. Same applies to a rope. There's a sequence in Leon's campaign, going back and bitching about that one again, where you have to go up an elevator cable. And I'm sorry to say this, but it took me a half an hour in order to find out what I was supposed to do. The directions on the screen were just telling me to alternate between the shoulder buttons, when in reality, what I had to do was that I had to hold on to one shoulder button, tap the other one, hold the one I just tapped, release this one, tap this one, and repeat that in alternate sides. It was really weird, felt really awkward in my hands. It definitely took me out of the game, which is something that I feel game developers, and that's like the #1 thing that could happen, #1 concern you should have with your product is if the person who's playing it gets taken out of the game. Also, the length of this game. Each campaign has 5 chapters in it, each chapter being almost an hour long. And with 4 campaigns, 5 chapters, about an hour, you got about 20 hours worth of gameplay here. And it drags on. This is the longest Resident Evil game that I've ever played. And I feel that that just hurts this product overall. There's so many filler sections that it just drags on and on. There's not enough plot development. And again, plot development with a bad plot is another turnoff, but I would rather... The tomb raiding sequences in Leon's campaign are probably the perfect example of this. They didn't need to be there. Let me get my objective and go. In terms of the campaign that probably had the least amount of this dragging on was probably Chris's campaign. I feel that overall, despite the fact that Chris is a more action-oriented campaign, which I really wanted a lot of survival horror from this game. I hate to admit that Chris's campaign, in my opinion, is probably the best one out of the batch. It never gets dull, it never really slows down, and for the most part, if you're playing a chapter that's an hour long, you're going to get an hour long worth of balls-to-the-wall content. You're not going to get these certain sections where things slow down, you have to do this, and that's another thing, too, is that in 3 basic campaigns you get, there are no puzzles, there's no real survival element to it, and you always pick up enough ammo to take down your next enemy. It feels so scripted and so on rails that I'm not exactly sure if you can fail at this game other than just stand still. So length does nothing but hurt the product. Overall, I can't recommend Resident Evil 6. As a Resident Evil game, I feel it fails. As an action game, I would say it succeeds. I think that it plays great despite some of the some preferences that I would like changed. Bonus content, at this time, we really don't have much. We have the Mercenaries mode, which has become standard, I guess, for the Resident Evil franchise. And I really did enjoy Mercenaries this time around. I feel that it's an improvement over Resident Evil 5, being able to play with a friend, going through all of this. I feel like Mercenaries was definitely well done with Resident Evil 6. An agent hunt mode, which allows you to jump into somebody else's campaign who's playing on PSN or Xbox Live and attack them as a monster. It is a neat addition, but I found some problems in there, like when I would spawn as a zombie, the zombies were too slow to make it to the actual players to attack them before you had to respawn again. So I felt that it was okay. I don't really, you can live without it. It's not something that's going to make or break the game. As far as downloadable content goes, guess what, everybody? Capcom has locked DLC on the disc. This in DLC, we found out, is a whole bunch of alternate costumes, new characters, melee abilities, taunts, even a new difficulty mode for the campaigns, already on the disc, and will probably be charged for it a little bit later. So, overall, Resident Evil 6 does not feel like a proper Resident Evil title. It seems to set an example of what it would be like if Michael Bay directed a Resident Evil film. As someone who didn't care too much for Resident Evil 5, I find myself wanting to pick up that compared to Resident Evil 6 any day in terms of campaigns. My opinion on this, giving it I've seen so many other news outlets and everything give very mixed reviews on this, some very positive, some extremely negative. I think that out of a scale of 1 to 10, I would probably give Resident Evil 6 a 5.5. As a Resident Evil game, it does fail. As an action game, it plays good. I would just like to see Capcom put a little bit more effort next time into their product, plot-wise, character-wise, things like this. Instead of trying to... I don't know what they're doing over there at Capcom. It seems like they want to shun what the fans want. Because I can tell you this right now, Resident Evil 6, as a diehard fan, was not something that I wanted. I felt that Resident Evil 5 left the franchise at a pretty definite close. Resident Evil 6 just feels unnecessary. And with several of the endings to the campaigns alluding to a Resident Evil 7, I feel that it's just completely unnecessary. So my final grade for Resident Evil 6 is a 5.5 out of 10. Phantasm Mask here, signing off.